Hello and welcome to Lunch and Learn Part 5, and the title of this Lunch and Learn is How to Be Creative Whilst Solo. My name's Laura Thompson and it's a pleasure to be here hosting this Lunch and Learn. It will last half an hour and I'm going to begin my slide share now. Okay, so how do I be creative while solo? There I was thinking that the biggest disruptor of the 2020s was going to be rapid automation and robots. Little could I or anyone else have predicted that it would be something completely different that actually transforms the very way in which we look at work and work at the start of this new decade of the 2020s. I've been interested in a while now for what will be some of these forever skills. So skills that are worthwhile honing and keeping sharp because they'll be needed for eternity. And actually creativity is one of those ones that time and time again has come up when looking at what might be some of these lifelong skills that are worthwhile keeping as sharp as possible. I've been finding it inspiring to look at nature or the natural world, to look at some inspiration as a visual metaphor to help make sense of what we could transfer from one world into making sense of this period of transformation that we're in. And actually, if you look at what creates a spark, friction is what creates the spark. And for many of us, we're feeling quite a bit of friction now. But for the spark to go on to create fire, you need three conditions. You need oxygen, heat and fuel. So where maybe many of us are experiencing a friction in our life right now, how do we convert that into something that is useful for us and we can create something that adds value? So there's so much going on. I need to make this work. So what now? Well, the aim for this Lunch and Learn is some practical tips for being creative whilst solo. The intention behind these Lunch and Learns is to create a great space to learn, judgment-free, one size fits one. So keep what works for you, discard what doesn't. This is a whole new situation for us all. My aim is to be friendly, light and positive, always rooted in commercial practicality. So the intention is you could put some of these tips into practice the moment you finish watching this. It's focusing on what we can do. So we'll look at three objectives, providing practical suggestions to guide your thinking, and for those of you with teams to be able to pass that on with teams, and some tips to help us thrive whilst working from home or furloughed from home, no matter how makeshift our current environment. The practical objectives for this session are how to have a rounded and rigorous thought process in my own head. We may now be having to think about ideas that are way beyond the confines of how we normally would have, with less people around to generate discussion and inspire some new thoughts. So how can I do that in my own head? How can I prepare a well thought out idea that is resilient enough to hold up to a video-based discussion? Wouldn't it be a shame if some of those ideas and that richness of some raw thinking never got out there because people were worried about it not being a very well thought out idea? So in a weird kind of way, sometimes in a video situation, you need to be more confident to put forward a thought than maybe in a real world table situation, because you have to formally interrupt the flow of conversation to bring out an idea. And that might be less easy to do when it's literally just you sitting in a room on your own. So it's throwing up all sorts of interesting ways to think about how we can bring some of those skills and confidences from a previous environment into this new environment. We're then going to hear from a guest speaker, so recorded a video in advance which I'll embed and show you. So for those who watch the live one, I'll now run this in real time, so this whole recording is one 30-minute set piece, and Simon is going to take us through how to engage others through the screen and sell an idea well. So Simon Arrowsmith is a friend of mine. He runs a business called Grow the People. And for about 5 years now, he's been working with global-based teams to help them sell and pitch ideas, whether internally within the organisation or externally to their customers. Okay, so gentle reminder from nature on surviving rapid change. I don't need to be the strongest, the most educated, the most intelligent person to be able to thrive through these rapid evolving times. The simple rule of nature is, as long as my rate of internal change matches the rate of external change, I am still fit supported and relevant for the environment in which I'm in. So absolutely now is the time to channel the mindset of a fox. This fox may have been trained as a hunting fox, but it rapidly has worked out it now needs to change its skill set and become a foraging fox if environmental conditions have changed, as opposed to a panda who was much slower to be able to deal with change because its life was very local and it was stuck with the way in which it's made to be able to chomp on bamboo. So it finds it trickier, more stressful to deal with change. So let's channel our inner fox. It might not have been what would have been predicted, but here we are in our environment. How can we thrive and go broad and wide and think about the skills that are required now? So, objective 1, how do I have a rounded and rigorous thought process, even if it's just me thinking through in a silent room? So this is a classic exercise, the 9 dots exercise. So the goal of the 9 dots exercise, you've got these 9 dots, and the challenge is you've got to link all the 9 dots up using straight lines only, without removing your pen from the paper, and in less than 4 lines. So it sounds easy. When I run this with people, this tends to be the first attempt. So you kind of go, right, line 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, there's a missing one in the middle. So you haven't joined them. Then they go with the diagonal first. Right, go diagonal down, then across, then up, then across. Oh, there's a missing one on the final column. And then, whether through discovery or through the answer being revealed, you realise that actually the only way to achieve this particular challenge is to think outside the box. So the 9 dots are not the cage, they are the foundation. And the green example here shows that the first line going out and beyond that 3rd dot, down then beyond the dot there in the column, up then to the top, then down to diagonal opposite, boom. By thinking outside the box, we've been able to come up with a solution that previously would have been invisible to us. Of course, we're all now having to think well outside the box in terms of handling our domestic, our professional setups. And so could it be that just looking at the environment we're in, rather than a cage, it's a platform upon which to think a little bit differently? So let's just have a think about creativity in terms of defining it and how important it is. So to be human is to create. Could it be that as of right now, you dedicate a section of each day just to be creative? Because our brains were made for more than just consuming stuff. It's not good for us to not create. How can I give my brain some exercise? The Oxford English Dictionary definition of creativity is the use of skill and imagination to produce something new or to produce art that has some kind of value. I kept thinking recently of the film Tom Hanks' Castaway. So there he is, stuck on this island, and it's just him. And to stop himself going mad, he basically creates a team around him to be able to interact with. So you have Wilson, the football there, who is the face that he interacts with. And what this film sort of shows us really is just the vital need for humans to be able to interact. It's part of what we do, to be able to create some kind of dialogue even, to then enable our brain to think outside just its own 4 walls. Isolation can be punishing, and yet people pay thousands to go on a retreat, so it can be meditative. It's whether we chose it or not that defines it as being either good or bad. Humans are social animals. Interaction stimulates our brain. And interestingly, we develop a theory of mind, us humans, at approximately 4 years old. And the theory of mind is that there's an ability to appreciate other people have a mental state different from mine. So it's part of our healthy human development to understand that I have some thoughts and other people have some thoughts. Just like the working week creates the weekend, for many of us, there needs to be an other in order to create a me. So how am I going to keep my brain creative if there's just me to interact with, or people who don't understand my work to interact with? Carving out a section of time each day to be creative, to give your brain a workout, some fresh air to your brain to keep it breathing. So the second thing then is to have a look at, well, what are some of the conditions for creativity? And I've called it friction or flow. What might be required? So let's just go back to the basics. The basic thought process of creativity has 2 directions, outwards and inwards. And it's the crunch that gives the moment of where you go, aha, that's it. So if you imagine you have a problem at the start, so the problem might be, how do we develop client relationships in this current scenario? So that's the problem. Now, because it's unprecedented, I can't Google my way out of this. I have to think for myself. We as a team have to think for ourselves. So the divergent thinking process is the first half of this creative process. And this might take 2 minutes, 2 days, 2 weeks. But this is where we explode out. We think big and wide. We brainstorm to create disorder. And you're bringing out all of that raw data, I call it. So you might be drawing it, mind mapping it, using a spidergram, but you're exploding out. And for some of us, that will come really easy. And for other people, that might be a bit of a challenge. We'll look at some tips that can help in a bit. But then we need the second half, otherwise we've just got mess. So the second half of the creative process, drawn to the second half of this diamond here, is the convergent thinking, converging on a point. It's where you need the friction to be able to force your brain to then think, right, how do these things all join up? How do I organise them? What might be some themes I can connect to arrive at some kind of order and a point? Otherwise, it's not going to add the value. So this is where the second half is where you're making lists, you're writing actions, you're making plans. So you're controlling the chaos that you've built midway through. And there'll be other people who find that bit easier. They much prefer to tidy up lots of thinking rather than create lots of thinking in the first place. What happens though if you've got to have a brainstorming team conversation on your own? So having to think about the environment you're in, our natural everyday opportunity for variety has changed. We might now need to consciously enable some conditions to help boost our creativity in our own homes. So if there's too much going on in your home, what could you do to plan in some opportunity for flow? Opening up ideas, to breathe in your mind, doing something random just for the pursuit of opening up your mind. If there's not enough going on in your home right now, what could you do to plan in some friction? So for arriving at a point, making a conflict, whether it's an opinion, so a conflict of opinion, we'll look at a tip later that can help that, or creating an even artificial, a conflict of time to close on a decision. So saying to yourself things like, right, I've got till 2 o'clock, then I need to come up with 3 ideas, creates the friction of bringing in that concept of time. So your brain is forced to start to think of some of those ideas and bring them into a point. So the conditions of creativity is you've got the outward and the inward. Having a look at your current setup now, what might you need to consciously put into place to enable you to be more creative? In a 3D world, 4D world, those situations would have happened more naturally. In our own world here, in our homes, we might have to create a structure that does that. Something really useful that I've used with teams over the years is that sometimes you can get a bit of a mind block when you're trying to come up with a great new idea because there's a pressure to it. The reverse brainstorming technique is where you basically flip it. So you reverse it and view the problem from another perspective, which can often throw out new and surprising ideas. So let's say the problem statement is, what is going to help us keep more customers during this time? And you reach for Google, but there's nothing there because we're the ones having to create the solutions. Okay, now the problem with that then is that there's, I need to get a hole in one on this, don't I? Because I need to come up with an answer that's actually going to work. And what that can then do is sort of frighten off creativity. If we flip it, this technique can be really useful, which is let's reverse it. Okay, what would help us to lose more clients during this period of transformation? And all the things that are definitely the things you wouldn't want to do, and you're creating a list. So you can look at that list and go, right, well, we better not do that then. So what would be the positive opposite that actually throws up some ideas of what we could do? So when ideas run dry, flipping the problem can often generate a list of the reverse solutions. So then you can look at each one of those ones and then flip it to then become a positive. So what might not be a good idea to do right now, you can then look at, okay, well, if we don't want to do that, bombard people with random emails, what could we do? And then suddenly it flashes up some outside the box thinking because we've looked at it from a different perspective. So to enable our brains not to get caged in and confined by this framework we put and viewing it more as a platform from which upon to think, so the 9 dots exercise, thinking outside the box. To be human is to create, not just to consume. So what might you do right from today to plan in some daily practice to get creating? It could be drawing, illustrating, listening to different types of music. The more random, the better, because the pursuit is just opening up some air into your brain. What might you be able to do in your own home to enable conditions to enable you to be more creative? Is it space that you need? So is it flow that you need, or is it friction to force you to think upon tidying up those ideas? So remember, we've got spreading out and then going in terms of that creative process. Flipping the force if you've got a mind block. So rather than trying to come up with a hole in one of a great idea, that often is too much pressure, flip it. What would not be a good idea to do right now? What wouldn't we want to do? And often changing that perspective can flush up some new thinking. So, objective 2. How do I prepare a well thought out idea that is resilient in discussion? So like those embers in the fire, how do they keep the heat going that actually you can then cook some new ideas upon? And if actually I'm too scared to put forward a new idea because I think, oh, I don't know how that will sound in, when I say it out loud, I'll keep it to myself. And potentially we're missing out on all of that creativity. So how do I keep the embers burning in my idea to ensure that actually when I put it forward, it might change shape a little bit, but the idea still adds some value? So the first thing is to watch out for the seduction of unconscious bias, i.e. my own little mental shortcuts. So the fancy word for that is heuristics, that potentially enable me to think quickly, but don't hold up under a bit of debate. Because in fact, they could close down creativity and it can make me close-minded because I'm thinking too quickly rather than keeping open-minded. The risk that runs then is it could take one comment from the team that then means that idea just doesn't hold up. We tend to see things not as they are, but as we are. So the idea about unconscious bias is when thinking about being creative, just check that you're not viewing it through a quite closed lens. Here are 3 big ones to have a think about, just to be aware of. When I'm thinking up of an idea, how do I ensure that I don't just confirm everything that I already know? So how do I ensure, or we as a team, that we're not just looking for information that justifies a point that we wanted to make anyway? These are new times for us all. All rules have gone in terms of how we might view things. So how do we as a team keep as fresh as possible in the perspective we bring? How can I ensure that I don't just come up with ideas that are for people like me? As busy as my household might be, and I'm looking for opportunities to carve out moments of silence, my neighbour next door has got a silent household looking for as much entertainment as possible to keep her entertained. So just coming up with a solution for people in my situation potentially excludes lots and lots of other people as well. So in-group bias is where you tend to look at problems and solutions that are only ones that you or people like you feel. So how can we as a team keep as broad-minded as possible when we think about what we want to be creative about? The status quo bias is that urge to stick with what we know. So the status quo bias is an awareness of how to ensure that we have the courage to view things a little bit differently and not just come up with the plan that we did last year, but done over video. What might require some real logical, real innovative thinking to avoid that we don't just copy and paste what we've done before, but give it a slightly different colour scheme, for example. So watch out for the seduction of unconscious bias. Heuristics on the whole keep us safe, enable us to be really efficient. But sometimes in times like this, they can actually mean that we close down our thinking too soon. The second thing to just put by you is there's this most wonderful tool called Edward de Bono's 6 Thinking Hats. You may have come across it before. It's a really useful way of ensuring that you keep as broad-minded as possible. And Edward de Bono had this idea of 6 thinking hats. So to avoid either one person only viewing something from an idea from one perspective, or a team not having rounded thinking, there's this idea of you switch hats. So you in your mind consciously put a different hat on to think about it. So the 6 hats are, the white hat is the facts. So what's the information and data I have on this? Whether there's 6 of us having a chat or one person on their own with a bit of paper thinking things through before a call. What are my feelings around this? That's the red hat. So that counters well white and red. That gives you a bit of friction then to view things in a more rounded way. Black hat, which is, well, what's the worst case scenario here? Because the black cat will be motivated to look at caution, things to be cautionate about. And the yellow hat is the optimistic, the sunny outlook. So what's the best case scenario here? And again, black hat and yellow hat operate across each other as a counter challenge, which again keeps a more balanced and rigorous thought process. Then we have green and blue. So the green hat is the creativity. So is this original and brand new? Is there anything other innovation that I could think about? And the blue hat is then a bit of the control, which is, okay, well, what's the measure for success here? And it enables the green hat to be sort of kept realistic, if that makes sense. So I have a natural tendency to have a yellow hat, sunny, optimistic outlook. That adds value, but it potentially leaves me at risk for not having thought through what might be a contingency plan or a plan B that actually would be useful, that I might need to create. There might be some people within your team who are naturally creative. How are you going to not dampen that or suppress that, but bring out the blue hat or encourage them to bring out the blue hat so they are able to control that creativity to actually bring it to action? So the Edward de Bono 6 thinking hats concept is a gorgeous way to either think rounded if it's just a party of one that's going on and you're in a bedroom and you're trying to work and be creative. And what it does is whether it's individual or team, it forces you to view things from a number of perspectives. The third thing before we start hearing from Simon is, how am I going to keep resilient in a robust discussion? The 2D as opposed to the 3D environment that we're now in could potentially hold back my confidence from putting forward an idea because the natural cues to interject in a conversation might be missing. So I guess it's just beginning with the end in mind. What's your intent here? I'm going to be passionate about the aim of my idea, not necessarily the idea itself. So I'm going to be passionate about the purpose as to why I've put forward this creative solution, but not sensitive whether the idea needs to be changed. If in my mind I can have as a good objective to bring 70% of an idea forward and ask the team then to refine the remaining 30%, then actually I'm adding my creativity, not getting concerned by perfection. Life is a mirror, and often the feedback and the responses you get back say more about the person that's giving you the feedback than necessarily you as the person that came up with the idea, because we all have our biases and our areas of interest, etc. So the second objective was, how do I prepare a well thought out idea that is resilient in discussion? And like the embers of a flame, they keep on burning even if the initial fire has kind of gone. How do I remain resilient so my thinking is good? Watching out for my unconscious bias, because it could close my ideas down too soon, or I could bark up the wrong tree. Switching my thinking hat to create a well thought out idea, so Edward de Bono's 6 thinking hats, and not being overly sensitive about the feedback that I get. Being passionate about the aim rather than the idea itself means that I can confidently contribute to creative conversation without being overly sensitive about an idea being looked at in a different way. So, objective number 3, how do I engage others through the screen and sell an idea well? Well, it is with great delight that I'm going to start playing a 9-minute clip from the wonderful Simon Arrowsmith, who runs a business called Grow the People. And for over 5 years now, he's helped global organisations sell in 2D, in particular with sales and customer service teams interacting either internally or externally. So I'm going to run the video now, and then I'll pick up to do our final wrap up.
Hello, I hope you're all doing okay in these strange times. My name is Simon. Quick thank you to Laura and the phenomenal team for inviting me to come and speak with you today. So I'm Simon, as I said, and I'm a story coach. That's one of those weird job titles that people kind of like go, what on earth is that about? Essentially what I do is I work with individuals and businesses to help them find craft and share their stories. And one of the things that has kept coming up over the last 5 years has been this idea of how stories help people sell, and increasingly how they sell remotely, how they sell using mediums like this. So that can be selling a product or service, or it could be selling an idea, so selling internally. So I've sort of become this accidental sales coach. I don't know how that happened, but here we are. So Laura asked me to come and, or to do this video and talk to you a little bit about how you can connect your creative ideas to your audience via the medium of video, or video conferencing, I should say. So sales had already changed. It changed before we were in this awful situation we're in. time had sort of moved on, and people were selling in a different way, or people have been selling in a different way, much more consultative, much more collaboratively, and communication, which has always been important in sales, was really, really important. And a lot of clients, particularly in the creative fields that I work in, have had global clients. So they will be making connections either via teleconference or video. So the kind of skills that we've been working on have been, how do you make sure that you stay engaging and connect with your audience when sometimes you can't see them, or this screen gets in the way. So I didn't really want to spend a lot of time thinking about how to position the camera or how you should set up your room. Those things are really important, making sure there's not piles of laundry behind you. Those things are really important. But if you scroll through LinkedIn at the moment, you'll see lots of people being really, really helpful and giving you those sort of tips. Now, I thought I would talk about the most important part of it, which is you, us, the human element. So there's 3 tips I would like to share with you. The first is about your humanity and your presence. The second is a quick overview of clarity. And the third is my favorite subject, about story structure. But let's start with presence, this idea of humanity. How can you stay present when you're on a screen? Well, the technology becomes quite interesting. It does interesting things to us as human beings. It actually removes some of our humanity. We start to adapt our behavior and forget who we are. We can become quite self-conscious. And I've seen a lot of different kind of interactions, particularly in the last 3 weeks when we've been doing these sort of remote working with a lot of different people who aren't used to it. So you'll get all sorts of different responses and all sorts of different ways of connecting through media, but most of them forget that actually there is a human being involved in both sides. So how do we stay human and present when we're on the screen? Well, the first thing that is different from a face-to-face meeting is the face. The face becomes a lot more important because it's one of the only communication tools you have, as well as your voice. So your face and how your face registers is really important. Smiling is very important when it comes to human connection. It's a universal sign that we are okay, that we're comfortable in one another's company, and it's a way to start connecting and building trust. Eye contact and smile. So a genuine, authentic smile, relaxing and feeling happy and okay, and then how that's demonstrated through the screen is really important. So making sure that you're looking there into the camera and not there. I've seen a lot of these type of things, not great. Maintain some kind of version of eye contact, which I know is difficult, particularly if the person's face is over there. But look at the camera when you're speaking, and then look at the person on screen when you're listening. So looking there and smiling. So that's the first part. We haven't lost our bodies altogether. That's good news. We still have the upper half to play with. And for those of you who know anything about body language, you'll know that actually the most important thing is to be open, to demonstrate a nice open gesture. Now, obviously, the camera, we're sort of used to the camera, so we know, and the screen, and we know therefore that we're not going to see your hands all the time. I'm not expecting you to stand like this for the 5-10 minutes you're trying to sell your creative idea. That would be ridiculous. But just make sure that you let the person know that you do have hands, and that they can see movement. You're a human being. So your face, your smile, and your connection through your body. The other thing that keeps you present in this, and particularly important in this environment, is the classic ratio of 2 ears, 1 mouth. Just because you're sharing your idea, just because you're trying to sell an idea across to people, doesn't mean that you're broadcasting. This isn't television. I see a lot of that happening at the moment. People thinking of it like a TV or like a TV show, trying to be perfect. Don't try and be perfect. We're humans. We are full of imperfections, and that should be celebrated, managed perhaps, but celebrated. So this isn't broadcast. This isn't television. This is interactive. This is more like a video game. It's more like if it was television, it would be that episode of Dark Mirror where you got to choose which where you went to next. It's that kind of thing. So don't think TV. Think game, you get to use your body, but also you get to use your ears. So engage with the other person with genuine curiosity. Ask great questions. Focus in on them so that you're listening when you need to listen, and that you appropriately speak when you need to. So that's face, smile, making sure you're open, and then connecting by listening. The next tip I want to give you is all about clarity. Now, keeping your message and your language as simple as possible should go without saying. I think that's really, really important. But given that we're in this very strange medium, which is reliant on technology and bandwidth and all those wonderful internet things, quite often your messages might be lost because of buffering or because something's happening or they're distracted at the other end. You don't have as much control over their attention. So I would recommend, as well as being clear, using a little bit of repetition to get your ideas across at a number of different times. Now, that doesn't mean repeating the same thing over and over again, but what it does mean is you might want to communicate your message 1, 2, probably 3 times in a slightly different way to make sure that you get that idea across and that it's landed. So, presence, humanity, and clarity. The last one is story. Story really here is all about structure. There are lots of different story structures, lots of different ways that we can tell a story, but the one I want to share with you is the simplest one. It's the classic 3-act structure of beginning, middle, and end. And the reason why this is so effective in any sales medium really, or any time you're communicating and you want to get your idea across or influence someone, is because this is how the brain works. We're constantly thinking using stories and storytelling mechanisms. So if we start to structure our communication as beginning, middle, and end, our listeners are already kind of engaged in that pattern. They're already used to that pattern. Now, you can't just go, here's the beginning bit, here's the middle bit, here's the end. Each one of those does something very specific. The beginning is all about the context, the scene setting, the challenge. That might be where you start asking your questions. It's really, really useful to set up the how you see it. Sometimes when you're engaging or you've got a creative idea that you want to share with someone, it might be the context of how you came to be trying to solve this problem. The middle section is all about struggle or conflict. That's a really important and often missing part of business stories. The conflict, the thing that's wrong, the problem you're trying to solve, and not shying away from that problem really, really matters. So in the middle section, that's your opportunity to listen to what you heard in the beginning, to the questions that you asked and what the answers were, and marry that with the idea that you have. So going, I understand your problem. Here is a high-level vision of the solution, and maybe thinking about what other problems you can identify based on what you heard. The last section, the end of the story, is all about resolution. So here you're bringing everything together, closing it down and saying, this is how my idea solves your problem. Giving them a nice definitive end to the story and being nice and clear about how your idea helps them. You're the expert, remember, you're the consultant, you're the one with the great idea. How can you make sure that you're making their life easier, that you're solving a problem that either they've come to you with or they didn't even know they had in the first place? So those are my quick 3 tips. Remember your humanity, be present, be clear as possible, maybe by repeating things like I'm doing now, and use stories and story structure to help you really sell your idea. My name's Simon. If you want some information, there's some down in the bottom in the link here. You can contact me there, or Laura will be sending out some information about me, I think, after this webinar. For now, head on back to Zoom and to Laura. Thanks. Hello.
Okay, so hello, welcome back to me. So thank you, Simon, who gave us some great tips about remember to be present, smile, look at the camera, listen, it's not TV. I'm starting to use a pair of eyes nearby my camera to force me looking up rather than just looking centre as I'm reading. So that might be something you could might find useful. Being clear, so repeating the message to cut through any distraction or buffering, etc. And using story to structure your pitch, beginning, middle and end. So a bit of blurb there at the bottom. So you can find Simon on Arrowsmith, Grow the People, and yeah, they've got some fab stuff on their website, particularly about virtually human, which you might find useful. So to wrap up, all of us are having to rethink our day-to-day ways of working. Who knows what you might be creating now, however makeshift, that actually influences the future norms. I've been finding it really inspiring to think about people in history who've had to deal with periods of I might be reminiscent of now. So astronauts, how do they keep interested in space? And Terry Waits, of course. So Terry Waits was held hostage for nearly 5 years in the Lebanon. This is many, many years ago now. I recall it from my childhood. And he once wrote a personal letter to some children at a school in the UK. So the pupils had been studying his time in solitude, often shackled with his eyes covered. His letter told the children, "During the time I was a hostage, I did not have anything to write with, and so I had to write in my head. By this I mean I had to make up stories in my imagination and tell them to myself. I was very glad that when I was at school I read a lot of books. I loved reading, and years later when I had no books, I could remember many of the stories. One day someone in your class may become a writer. You never know. I never thought I should write a book, but now I've written 5. So, as the flint contains the spark, unknown to itself until it gets friction against something else, what hidden talents might emerge as a result of this period of transformation? What could be a gift inside that just hasn't had the spark yet to bring to life, and that otherwise could have been hidden? So how can we make this time count? They say necessity is the mother of all invention. Through this period of transformation, I can either keep my brain consuming or creating in order to be occupied. Who knows the legacy that you could create for your team, your industry, your friends and your family, and you with just the smallest amount of imagination. So just like those standing stones of Stonehenge, they have been there for 5,000 years, weathering all sorts of storms, weathering all sorts of human comings and goings, and they're still standing there strong. Creativity is one of those pillars of human skills that is one of the USPs, the selling points of being human. So how am I going to be creative during this period when I need to think differently more than ever? How am I going to think around my ideas to be able to present them with rigor so we can actually take them forward and make something happen? How am I going to bring my ideas to life over the screen? And thank you, Simon Arrowsmith, again for your marvellous bit. So my name's Laura. Keep human, stay foxy. See you at the next webinar. Keep safe. See you soon.